Warning! Kinda Murdery contains adult themes, explicit language, and descriptions of violence. It is not suitable for anyone, and we recommend you stop listening now.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Kinda Murdery, a true crime podcast that's mostly about murder, and always about the strange and compelling stories that arise when the path less traveled twists to darkness, and those who walk its shadows surrender to violence and moral corruption. I'm your host, Zevon Odelberg, and thank you for lending me your courage and good company for the perilous journey ahead. I'd like to welcome you to Real Monsters of Halloween Night, the Candyman murder of Timothy O'Brien. But before we begin this tale of Halloween horror, I'd like to touch on two causes that are of the utmost importance to me. If you're a regular listener, you may know what I'm about to say. And if you're new, perhaps a fan of British murders, whose host Stuart Blues I was lucky enough to collaborate with recently on a story called Dr. Devil's Breath, Holly Harvey Crippen and the Murder of Cora Crippen, which if you haven't heard it yet, please do check out the British Murders podcast, and after you've heard my story, keep right on listening because Stuart does a phenomenal job. So if you're a new listener to Kinda Murdery, first of all, welcome. Secondly, you may not have heard me say this yet, but I have cerebral palsy, a nervous disorder that affects motor function as well as muscular development. And it's my hope that Kinda Murdery can become a support community for people with disabilities, both physical and otherwise. I want us all to be able to support each other, and for people to feel comfortable sharing stories of the unique challenges in their lives. The more we learn about others, the more real they become to us, and the more empathy we can have for one another. If you have a story you'd like to share, please reach out to me, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on all social media. I'd love to connect with you, and whatever you tell me can either remain between us or be shared with the audience. That's up to you. I'd also like to remind everyone listening about the free 3-digit lifeline number 988, which you can call to immediately speak to someone about substance use, mental health issues, or suicidal thoughts. And again, in case we have any British Murders fans with us today, the equivalent service in the UK is called the Samaritan Hotline, and the number is 116-123. That's 116-123. So if you're in the US, please program 988 into your phone, and if you're in the UK, please program 116-123. Use the numbers if you need them, and always remember that the world is a better place with you in it. And if you're not in immediate crisis but would like to connect with someone, it would be my honor to be a shoulder for you to lean on. I'm here and I care. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, kindamurdery@gmail.com or @kindamurdery on all social media. If you're like me, I imagine most of you grew up hearing stern warnings from your parents about the dangers of trick-or-treating. Specifically, the horrible possibility that your candy had been tampered with, or that your chocolate bars might be concealing razor blades, or worse, contaminated with deadly poison. And as a child, you imagined that the boogeyman who poisoned children's candy would be a nefarious stranger out to harm innocent little ones on their favorite night, simply because that stranger was a monster, motivated purely by their love of evil. The Halloween candy contaminators were modern-day equivalents of the witch from Hansel and Gretel, driven to harm the innocent because it was in their very nature. They literally hunger to do harm. And it's also likely that your well-meaning parents, as they warned you out of caution born from love, imagined a similar villain. As a child, I certainly never dreamed that if my candy were to be converted to a deadly poison, that the poisoner would be none other than the person who I trusted the most. The person whose most important job in the world was to love me and protect me. And the parents who instructed me to be oh so careful about tampered candy, they too never dreamed they might need to protect me from themselves. Which brings us to today's story, the murder of 8-year-old Timothy O'Brien, whose young life was taken from him by a homicidal maniac who must have been truly dead inside, a murderer known as the man who killed Halloween, and perhaps most memorably nicknamed the Candyman, an inhuman ghoul tailor-made for this Halloween Eve special edition of Kinda Murdery. So if you're ready to hear more about the Candyman murder, then all I ask is that you put your personal items underneath the seat in front of you. Stow your baggage in the overhead compartment. Let go of the cares of the day, but be sure to buckle your seatbelt, because turbulence is expected ahead. Real Monsters of Halloween Night, the Candyman murder of Timothy O'Brien, starts now. Ronald Clark O'Brien was born in Houston, Texas on October 19, 1944. At the age of 30, he married a woman named Dayneen, and in 1966, the first of their two children, Timothy O'Brien, was born, followed 3 years later by his younger sister, Elizabeth. The O'Brien family lived in Deer Park, Texas, a middle-class suburb of Houston. Ronald worked as an optician and served as deacon at a Baptist church where he sang in the choir and oversaw the parochial bus program. Those who knew Ronald O'Brien considered him a model citizen. One pastor described him as a good Christian man and an above-average father. In reality, O'Brien had difficulty holding down a job. He was employed by 21 different companies over a 10-year period and fired from each for negligence or fraudulent behavior. In fall of 1974, 30-year-old O'Brien was on the brink of being fired again after his employer, Texas State Optical, suspected him of stealing money. His take-home salary of $150 a week barely covered food and rent, and it was later discovered that he was more than $100,000 in debt. He had defaulted on several bank loans, and his car was on the verge of being repossessed. On October 31st, 1974, O'Brien took his children trick-or-treating in Pasadena, Texas, accompanied by a neighbor and their two children. It was noted that O'Brien, who had never cared about Halloween before, was very excited to take the children trick-or-treating this year. At some point in the night, O'Brien, the neighbor, and the 4 children visited a home where the occupant failed to answer the door. The children grew impatient and ran ahead to the next home, while O'Brien stayed behind. He eventually caught up with the group and produced 5 21-inch pixie sticks, which he would later claim he was given from the occupant of the house that had not answered the door. At the end of the evening, O'Brien gave a pixie stick to each of his neighbor's 2 children, and 1 pixie stick each to Timothy and Elizabeth. Upon returning home, he gave the 5th pixie stick to a 10-year-old boy whom he recognized from his church. Before bed, Timothy asked to eat some of the candy he collected, and according to Ronald, he chose the pixie stick. Timothy had trouble getting the powdered candy out of the straw, so O'Brien helped him loosen the powder. After tasting the candy, Timothy complained that it tasted bitter. O'Brien gave his son some Kool-Aid to wash away the taste, but the boy immediately began convulsing. O'Brien would later claim that he held Timothy while he was vomiting until the child went limp in his arm. Timothy O'Brien died en route to the hospital less than an hour after consuming the candy. Timothy's death from poisoned Halloween candy raised fear in the community. Numerous parents in Deer Park and the surrounding area turned in candy their children got from trick-or-treating to the police, fearing that it was laced with poison. When Timothy's body was brought to the morgue, the medical examiner recalled the scent of almonds coming from the boy's mouth, often a telltale sign of cyanide poisoning. An autopsy later confirmed that Timothy had consumed enough potassium cyanide to kill 2 or 3 grown men. The police did not initially suspect O'Brien of any wrongdoing until Timothy's autopsy revealed, as has just been stated, that the pixie sticks he had consumed was laced with a fatal dose of potassium cyanide. Police were able to recover the other 4 pixie sticks, all of which were uneaten. They determined that someone had replaced the top 2 inches of each with granules of cyanide. Investigators had O'Brien and his neighbor Bates retrace their steps from Halloween night. O'Brien gave conflicting accounts as to which house handed out the poison candy. Initially, he told police that he could not remember which house he had gotten the pixie sticks from, but law enforcement became suspicious because O'Brien and his neighbor had only taken their children to homes on 2 streets due to the fact that it was raining. Their suspicions increased after learning that none of the homes they visited had given out pixie sticks. After walking the neighborhood with the police 3 times, Brian led them to the home where no one had answered the door. He claimed that he went back there before catching up with the group. He said the owner of the home did not turn the lights on, but did crack the door open and hand him the pixie sticks. He claimed to have only seen the man's arm, which he described as hairy. The home was in fact owned by a man named Courtney Melvin. Melvin was an air traffic controller at William P. Hobby Airport and didn't get home from work until 11 p.m. on Halloween night. Police ruled Melvin out as a suspect when over 200 people confirmed that he had been at work. Police investigators soon learned that Ronald O'Brien was over $100,000 in debt. He was suspected of theft at his job at Texas State Optical and was close to being fired. His car was about to be repossessed. He had defaulted on several bank loans, and the family home had been foreclosed on. Police discovered that O'Brien had taken out life insurance policies on his children in the months preceding Timothy's death. Police also found a piece of adding machine tape on it, O'Brien had written down the amount of each of his bills. The total came out to almost the exact amount he stood to collect from the proceeds on the insurance policies he had taken out on his children. In January 1974, he had taken out $10,000 life insurance policies on both of his children. 1 month before Timothy's death, O'Brien took out additional $20,000 policies on both children, despite the objections of his life insurance agency. In the days preceding Timothy's death, O'Brien took out yet another $20,000 policy on each child. The various policies totaled approximately $60,000. O'Brien's wife maintained that she did not know about the insurance policies on her children's lives. Police learned that the morning after Timothy's death, O'Brien had called his insurance company to inquire about collecting on the policies he'd taken out on his son. As police dug deeper, they discovered that O'Brien had inquired with several chemical companies on where to buy cyanide, and jokingly asked how much it would take to kill a person. They found a pocket knife in O'Brien's home with candy residue on it, suggesting how the candy might have been contaminated. After learning that O'Brien had visited a chemical supply store in Houston to buy cyanide shortly before Halloween 1974, he left without purchasing anything after learning that the smallest amount available to purchase was 5 pounds. But police began to suspect that Ronald O'Brien had laced the candies with poison in an effort to kill his children to collect their life insurance policies. They believed he gave the other children poisoned candy in an effort to cover up his crime. Police repeatedly questioned O'Brien, but he maintained his innocence. Although police never discovered when or where O'Brien bought the poison, and although O'Brien played the part of a grieving father, after he failed a polygraph, he was arrested on November 5, 1974, and charged with Timothy's murder. Said former District Attorney Clyde DeWitt, "I am not able to imagine a crime more reprehensible than someone killing his own child for money." In fact, he was charged with more than just Timothy's murder. Ronald O'Brien was indicted on 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. He entered a plea of not guilty on all 5 counts. His trial began in Houston on May 5, 1975. During the trial, a chemist who was acquainted with O'Brien testified that in the summer of 1973, O'Brien contacted him asking about cyanide and how much would be fatal. A chemical supply salesman also testified that O'Brien had asked him how to purchase cyanide. Friends and co-workers testified that in the months before Timothy's death, O'Brien showed an unusual interest in cyanide and spoke about how much it would take to kill a person. It almost seems as though he was subconsciously dead set on revealing his guilt. O'Brien's sister-in-law and brother-in-law testified that on the day of Timothy's funeral, O'Brien spoke of using the money from Timothy's insurance policy to take a long vacation and buy other items. O'Brien's wife rejected the claim that Timothy himself chose the pixie sticks, stating that O'Brien had in fact forced the boy to choose the sticks. O'Brien continued to maintain his innocence, and his defense mainly drew upon the decades-old urban legend concerning a mad poisoner who hands out Halloween candy laced with poison, or needles, or candy apples with razor blades inserted. These stories have persisted despite the fact that there are no documented instances of strangers poisoning Halloween candy. Indeed, as I said at the outset, the true life, true crime inspiration for these urban legends appears to have been worst father ever, Ronald O'Brien himself. O'Brien's case and the subsequent trial garnered national attention, and the press dubbed O'Brien the Candyman. Speaking to Ronald Clark O'Brien's mental state, Joni Johnson, a forensic psychologist and private investigator, stated that poisoners as a group typically lack empathy, evidenced by the premeditated nature in which they kill and the cold, calculating strategy they often use. Poisoning is an instrument for someone who is cunning and sneaky, not someone who is going to be physically or verbally aggressive. Poisoners are more likely to be polite behind the scenes, and as a result, they tend to fool people. But Ronald Clark O'Brien's days of fooling people were over. On June 3, 1975, a jury took 46 minutes to find O'Brien guilty of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. The jury took 71 minutes to sentence him to death by electrocution. Shortly after he was convicted, his wife filed for divorce. She later remarried, and her new husband adopted her surviving daughter, Elizabeth. O'Brien would appeal his guilty verdict multiple times, twice to the Supreme Court. Former District Attorney DeWitt wrote the brief for O'Brien's final appeal in 1979. The last sentence of his oral argument to the Court of Criminal Appeals was something like this: "If these facts do not support the jury's death sentence, there never will be facts that will." In the end, all appeals were denied. At the time of O'Brien's conviction, men sentenced to death under Texas law were confined to the Ellis 1 unit near Huntsville, Texas. According to Reverend Carol Pickett, a former chaplain who worked for the Texas Department of Criminal Justice, O'Brien was shunned and despised by his fellow death row inmates for killing his child, and was absolutely friendless. The inmates reportedly petitioned to hold an organized demonstration on O'Brien's execution date to express their hatred of the hideous man. O'Brien's first execution date was set for August 8, 1980. His attorney successfully petitioned for a stay of execution. A second date was scheduled for May 25, 1982. That date was also postponed. Judge Michael McSpadden scheduled a third execution date for Halloween, October 31st, 1982, the 8th anniversary of the crime, and the judge offered to personally drive O'Brien to the death chamber. It would have been the first time Texas executed an inmate by lethal injection. The Supreme Court delayed the date yet again to give O'Brien a chance to pursue an appeal to seek a new trial, and a fourth date was scheduled for March 31st, 1984. O'Brien's lawyer sought a fourth stay on the basis that lethal injection was cruel and unusual punishment, but that too was rejected, and as I had stated previously, ultimately all appeals were unsuccessful and stays were lifted. On March 31st, 1984, shortly after midnight, O'Brien was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville unit. His last meal consisted of a T-bone steak, well done, French fries and ketchup, whole kernel corn, sweet peas, lettuce, and tomato salad with egg and French dressing, iced tea, sweetened, saltines, Boston cream pie, and rolls. These were the last words of Ronald Clark O'Brien, the heartless killer who had come to be known as the man who killed Halloween, or the Candyman. Said O'Brien, "What is about to transpire in a few moments is wrong. I would forgive all who have taken part in any way in my death." O'Brien was so hated for his heinous crime that during his execution, a crowd of some 300 demonstrators gathered outside the prison and cheered, while some yelled "trick or treat" and showered anti-death penalty demonstrators with candy. Heading into Halloween tomorrow night and the forthcoming trick-or-treating and candy-gorging extravaganza, it should be noted that despite O'Brien's horrific crime, there's no reason to fear Halloween. There is in general no correlation in America between the holiday and increased crime. In particular, the widespread fear of poisoned or booby-trapped candy is an urban legend without a real basis. An urban legend, in fact, that Ronald Clark O'Brien tried to exploit to make his own innocence plausible. And the dark and horrifying irony is that as parents all over the nation worry about a stranger contaminating their child's candy, the one known instance of that horror occurring and resulting in a child's death was not a stranger poisoning the candy, but a sociopathic parent who cared more about escaping debt and buying more stuff than he did about the lives of his own children or those of his friends and neighbors. So go out tomorrow night, take your kids trick-or-treating, enjoy yourself, and do everything you can to forget about Ronald Clark O'Brien, who former Harris County Assistant District Attorney Mike Hinton once called the man that ruined Halloween for the whole world. But we're not about to let him do that. So put on costumes, ring doorbells, shout trick-or-treat happily, and do everything you can to forget all about the Candyman. I'm Zevon Odelberg, and this has been Kinda Murdery. Happy Halloween, everybody.